The address glowed wrong on my phone screen, but I was already 20 minutes late, and my manager would dock my pay if I took any longer. So I pushed through the gleaming lobby doors of the high-rise anyway, pizza bags balanced against my hip, the heat seeping through my thin jacket. The doorman barely glanced at me, used to delivery people invading his polished domain, and I slipped into the elevator before he could question whether I belonged in this building, where the monthly rent probably exceeded my yearly income. Floor 28. The hallway smelled like expensive candles and money, thick carpet muffling my worn sneakers, and I checked the receipt again because something fell off, but I was too exhausted to care. 3 jobs and not enough sleep, blurring everything into survival mode. I knocked on 2804, waited, heard movement inside. The door opened and my breath caught because the man standing there was shirtless, all carved muscle and dark ink swirling across his chest and shoulders, and his eyes were gray like winter storms, cold and assessing, and a face too handsome to be safe. He looked annoyed, eyebrows drawn together, mouth set in a hard line. But then his gaze dropped to my hands as I reached for the pizza bags. And everything changed. The air itself shifted. His entire body went still in a way that reminded me of predators on nature documentaries. That focused intensity right before the strike. And I realized he was staring at my wrist where my sleeve had ridden up, exposing the finger-shaped bruises Marcus Webb left last night. Those gray eyes snapped back to my face, and I wanted to run, but my feet would not move. Who did this to you? His voice was quiet, controlled, but something deadly moved underneath the calm. I pulled my sleeve down fast, too fast, stammering that it was nothing. I bruised easily. I just needed payment for the pizza. He did not move from the doorway, did not blink. Asked again who put those marks on me, and I lied. Said I was clumsy, bumped into things. Please, I needed to go. He studied me for a long moment, and I felt stripped bare under that gaze. Like he could see every secret I buried, every excuse I made, every time I covered bruises with makeup and long sleeves. Then he stepped back, pulled out his wallet, handed me bills without counting. Way too much. Easily triple the order cost. Keep it. His voice was softer now, but no less intense. I tried to give back the extra, but he closed my fingers around the money, his hand warm and solid, and careful not to touch the bruises. And then he took the receipt and wrote something on it before handing it back. My personal number. When you are ready. I shook my head, said I did not need anything. Thank you for the tip, and finally my legs remembered how to work. I turned toward the elevator, skin prickling because I knew without looking that he watched me. Felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch. And when the elevator doors finally closed, I sagged against the wall, heart hammering. Something about him terrified me. Something about him felt like salvation. I should throw away the receipt. I tucked it into my pocket instead. The apartment door stuck like it always did, and I had to shoulder it open, the sound loud enough to wake Marcus Webb if he was sleeping. But I found him awake instead, sprawling on our sagging couch with empty beer bottles lined up on the coffee table like soldiers, his eyes tracking me as I entered, and my stomach dropped because I knew that look, that dangerous glassy focus that meant he had been drinking and thinking, and nothing good ever came from that combination. You took forever. His voice was too calm, the kind of calm that preceded storms. I checked the receipt times and my pulse started hammering because I had taken 47 minutes for a delivery that should have been 20. Too long, way too long. And I scrambled for excuses about traffic and wrong addresses, but he was already standing, swaying slightly, closing the distance between us. Who were you with? Nobody. Just deliveries. My manager sent me across town. I tried to keep my voice level and soothing, the tone I used when he got like this. But he grabbed my arm exactly where the bruises already lived, and white-hot pain exploded up to my shoulder. I gasped, could not stop the sound, and something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, before he accused me of cheating, said I smelled different, looked different, was lying to him. I tried to pull away, and he shoved me backward into the kitchen counter, the edge catching my hip bone, and I tasted fear metallic and familiar. He loomed over me demanding to know who I was seeing, what I was doing, why I was destroying us, and I made myself small, made myself apologize for things I did not do, agreed that I should have been faster, promised nothing was wrong, anything to diffuse this. He stared at me for a long moment, and I held my breath. Then he released me with a sound of disgust and stumbled back to the couch, reaching for another beer. I did not wait to see if his mood would shift again, just walked quickly to the bathroom, locked the door with shaking hands, and slid down to sit on the cold tile floor. Through the thin door, I heard him muttering, then the television blaring too loud, then eventually his snoring, that particular rattling sound that meant he passed out drunk. I should have felt relief, but instead I just felt hollow, scooped out until I remembered the receipt still crumpled in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, smoothed it against my knee, stared at the number written in strong, confident strokes. A stranger's number, a dangerous man's number. Why did his concern feel safer than my own home? I could not answer that, but I tucked the receipt into my bra against my heart and tried not to think about gray eyes that saw too much. Sleep would not come. I lay in the bathtub with a pillow and blanket, doors still locked, and replayed every second of that doorway encounter. The way Dante Rossetti's entire body had gone still when he saw my bruises. The deadly quiet in his voice. The careful way he had not touched the marks when he pressed money into my hand. Something about him promised violence, but not toward me. Never toward me. That certainty should not have existed after one meeting, but it lived in my chest anyway, warm and terrifying and impossible to ignore. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fryer grease, familiar and suffocating in equal measure, and I moved through my shift on autopilot, exhaustion dragging at my bones because I had not slept more than 2 hours. Every noise in the apartment jerking me awake in case Marcus Webb changed his mind about passing out. I wore long sleeves despite the oppressive heat, the fabric sticking to my skin, hiding the evidence written across my arms in shades of purple and yellow. And my manager, Denise, had already given me the look, that pinched expression that said she noticed, but would not ask because asking meant getting involved. The lunch rush thinned to scattered customers, truckers, and elderly couples, and teenagers cutting class. And I refilled coffee mugs and delivered plates of eggs and pancakes while my mind replayed gray eyes and careful hands and a phone number I should have thrown away but kept instead pressed against my heart like a talisman. The bell above the door chimed, and I glanced up automatically, then froze because a black luxury car was pulling into the parking lot outside, sleek and predatory among the rusted sedans and pickup trucks. Completely out of place in this neighborhood where everything was tired and worn down. My heart started hammering before I even saw him emerge from the vehicle, tall and commanding in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, moving with that controlled grace that marked him as dangerous. Dante Rossetti walked through the diner door like he owned the place, scanning the room until his eyes found mine, and I felt that same electric shock as the night before. He wore sunglasses despite being indoors, but I could still feel the weight of his attention, still feel him studying me. He took a booth in my section without being seated, sliding into the cracked vinyl with easy confidence, and I approached on unsteady legs, menu in my hands to give them something to do. Coffee. My voice came out steadier than I expected, but he could probably hear my heart pounding anyway. Black, and he handed me a business card along with his order. Elegant thick cardstock with just a name and phone number. No company, no title, nothing that explained who he was or what he did. I stared at it, knowing I should give it back, knowing I should tell him I was fine, that I did not need whatever he was offering. But instead I tucked it into my apron pocket and asked if he wanted anything to eat. He said no, just coffee, and then surprised me by asking how I was feeling. If I needed medical attention for anything. I lied again, said I was fine, just clumsy, but something in his expression told me he did not believe a word. When I brought his coffee, he wrapped his hands around the mug and studied me in a way that made me feel naked, exposed, like he could see through all my careful facades to the broken woman underneath. He told me when I was ready, call the number. Someone would answer any time, day or night. And then he stood and placed 2 20s on the table for a $3 coffee and walked out before taking a single sip, leaving me standing there with the business card burning in my pocket and my heart racing and the certainty that everything had just shifted again, tilted further towards something I could not take back. My break came 45 minutes later, and I disappeared into the back storage room with my phone, hands still shaking from the weight of the business card burning in my apron pocket. And I opened the browser and typed Dante Rossetti into the search bar, my thumb hovering over the enter button for a long moment, because part of me knew that once I looked, Once I confirmed what my instincts were already screaming, everything would become real and irreversible. The search results loaded, and I scrolled through them with my heart climbing into my throat, finding nothing concrete at first, just a few mentions in society pages about charity galas and business acquisitions. A photo of him in a tuxedo looking devastating and untouchable at some fundraiser. But then I found the forums, the rabbit holes where people whispered about things they could not prove. Threads about the Rossetti family controlling half the organized crime in the city, about Dante Rossetti taking over the empire at 19 after his father died in what was officially ruled a heart attack, but unofficially understood as an execution about territory and gambling and protection rackets and violence delivered with surgical precision. I delivered pizza to a mafia boss. The words repeated in my head like a prayer or a curse, and my stomach twisted because he knew where I worked, knew my name, had tracked me down after one encounter. And that kind of reach spoke to resources and power that should have sent me running. Except he also offered help, extended his hand when he had no reason to care about some broken waitress with bruises she tried to hide. My phone buzzed, and I nearly dropped it. Saw Marcus Webb's name flash across the screen. The first of what would become 15 texts over the next 2 hours, starting with "Where are you?" Then escalating to "Who are you with? And you better not be ignoring me, and I know you are hiding something." Then the whiplash shift to "Baby, I am sorry about last night, and I love you, and please talk to me, and why are you doing this to us?" The pattern was so familiar it made me nauseous. This cycle I had lived through 100 times. His anger followed by remorse, followed by suspicion, followed by promises. Spinning endlessly until I could not remember which version of him was real, or if any of them were. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and returned to the floor. But Denise caught my arm as I passed, her grip firm and her expression tight. "You have been distracted all day, Clara. I cannot have you messing up orders or ignoring customers. You are on thin ice here." Her words hit like a slap, because I could not afford thin ice. Could not afford to lose another job when I had already lost 3 in the past 6 months. Twice because Marcus Webb showed up drunk and caused scenes that got me fired for bringing personal drama to work. Once because I called in sick too many times after he hurt me badly enough that I could not hide it. I promised Denise it would not happen again, painted on my customer service smile, and finished the shift, moving through motions while my mind spun between a dangerous man who saw me and a boyfriend who owned me, and the terrible knowledge that I had just looked into shadows I could never unsee. Marcus Webb arrived home at 6 p.m. sober for the first time in a week. And that fact alone put me on edge because his patterns were predictable and sobriety was not part of them. And when he walked through the door carrying grocery store flowers wrapped in crinkled plastic, carnations dyed garish pink, I felt my stomach clench with the familiar dread that came with his apology cycles. "Baby, I am so sorry about last night," he said. And his eyes were clear but red-rimmed like he had been crying. And he set the flowers on the counter and reached for me carefully like I might bolt. I let him hold me because resistance cost more energy than I had left. Let him murmur promises into my hair about how it would never happen again, how he was going to get help, how he loved me more than anything. The same script I had heard 100 times with only minor variations in word choice and tone. We ate the dinner he brought home, Chinese takeout from the place on 5th Street, and the silence between us felt like glass, fragile and sharp. Both of us moving carefully around the edges of what had happened the night before. He asked about my shift, and I told him it was fine, busy, nothing special. And I did not mention the black luxury car or gray eyes or the business card that was still hidden in my apron pocket at the bottom of my bag, because some instinct older than thought told me that information would detonate whatever temporary peace we had constructed. After dinner, I showered, let the hot water pound against my shoulders until the small bathroom filled with steam. And when I came out wrapped in a towel, Marcus Webb was sitting on the bed holding my phone, and the expression on his face made my blood turn to ice. "Who is Michael?" he asked, and his voice was too quiet, too controlled. And I realized with sickening clarity that he had gone through my contacts while I was in the shower, had seen Dante Rossetti's number that I had saved under a fake name, because some part of me knew even then that I might need it, might need him. "Just a customer from the diner," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to project the exhaustion and resignation that usually made Marcus Webb back down. But something was different tonight. Something in him had shifted past the point where my surrender would satisfy. "You are lying," he said, standing up, and the phone looked small in his hand, fragile. "Why would a customer give you his personal number? Why would you save it?" I tried to explain, said some people left numbers for carry-out orders, that it did not mean anything, but he was not listening anymore. His face flushing red the way it always did before the violence came. He spat, and the word hit like a fist before his actual hand did, cracking across my face hard enough that I tasted copper. Felt my lips split open again in almost the same place as the half-healed cut from 2 nights ago. He started crying immediately, the rage collapsing into sobbing apologies, reaching for me, but I was already moving, grabbing my phone from where he had dropped it, backing toward the bedroom. And when he lunged after me, I slammed the door and locked it with shaking hands. I heard him collapse against the wall outside, heard him crying and pleading, and I sat on the floor with my back against the door and my split lip bleeding onto my shirt and pulled up Dante Rossetti's number. And at 2 a.m., when the apartment finally went silent and I could hear Marcus Webb snoring on the couch, I typed one word and hit send. The response came in 30 seconds. Just one word glowing on my cracked phone screen in the darkness of the locked bedroom. Address. My hands shook so badly I could barely type out the street name and apartment number. Each letter a commitment I could not take back. And the moment I hit send, his reply came through with the same terrifying efficiency. 20 minutes. Do not engage. Stay in locked room. I stared at those words and felt something shift inside me. Some final tether to my old life snapping clean. Because I was really doing this, really letting a man I had met once, a dangerous man whose world operated in shadows and violence, come to my apartment in the middle of the night to handle my problems in ways I could not let myself imagine too clearly. I moved on autopilot after that, pulling my battered duffel bag from the closet and stuffing clothes into it without caring what I grabbed. Essential documents from the shoebox under my bed, the few pieces of jewelry my grandmother left me, the photo of my parents that was the only one that survived the fire. Moving quietly, efficiently, like I was preparing for war or escape. Through the bedroom door, I heard Marcus Webb talking, his voice slurred and desperate as he alternated between threats and promises. Said he would break down the door if I did not come out. Said he loved me, could not live without me, would kill any man who tried to take me away. Said he would hurt himself if I left him. The same manipulation tactics he had used for 2 years, but they felt different now. Hollow, like words spoken in a language I no longer understood. The knock came at 2:17 a.m. 3 soft raps that somehow managed to carry authority and menace in equal measure. I heard Marcus Webb stumbling to the door, heard voices in the hallway, his voice rising in confusion and then dropping to something that might have been fear. I could not make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Dante Rossetti was explaining something to Marcus Webb, and Marcus Webb was listening. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. Then footsteps in the hallway, and a knock on my bedroom door, but different this time. Gentler. A voice saying my name in a way that made me feel safe despite everything I knew about him. It was over. I opened the door and found Dante Rossetti standing there, his expression unreadable, but his eyes kind. Marcus Webb was nowhere to be seen. Dante Rossetti asked if I was ready, and when I nodded, he took my bag without comment and guided me toward the front door. We walked through my apartment like ghosts, past the overflowing ashtray and empty bottles, past the wilted carnations already dropping petals on the counter, past the life I was leaving behind. Vincent Torino was waiting by a black SUV, tall and silent, and somehow both comforting and terrifying. He opened the back door for me with surprising gentleness, and I slid inside while Dante Rossetti loaded my bag into the trunk. The interior smelled like leather and safety, if safety had a scent. As we pulled away from the building, I turned to look back one last time. Marcus Webb was standing at our apartment window, silhouetted against the yellow light, watching me leave. He did not follow. He did not call my phone. Whatever Dante Rossetti had said to him, it had been effective. I asked what happened, what was said. Dante Rossetti met my eyes in the rearview mirror and said simply that Marcus Webb had been given an opportunity to reconsider his life choices, that he would not be bothering me again. The certainty in his voice was both thrilling and terrifying. The guest house was a revelation. Not an apartment or a room, but an entire small house nestled behind the main estate, complete with a kitchen and living area and bedroom that was bigger than the entire place I had shared with Marcus Webb. Mrs. Hartwell greeted us at the door with warm eyes and gentle hands, taking my bag and showing me around like I was a welcome guest instead of a refugee. She assured me that I was safe here, that the property was secure, that I could rest and heal for as long as I needed. When she left me alone, I sat on the edge of the bed and wept. Not from sadness, but from relief, so overwhelming it felt like drowning. I had a place to sleep where I would not be hurt, for walls that belonged to me, at least temporarily, silence that was peaceful instead of tense. For the first time in 2 years, I was alone and not afraid. Sleep came like a benediction, deep and dreamless and healing. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows that faced a garden instead of a brick wall, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Then memory returned, not with panic but with cautious hope. I was safe. Marcus Webb could not find me here. I had chosen to trust a dangerous man, and so far, that choice had saved my life. The days that followed blurred together in the most beautiful way. Mrs. Hartwell brought me breakfast each morning and asked nothing about my past or my bruises, though I caught her sometimes looking at the fading marks on my arms with an expression that might have been understanding. She had stories, too, I realized. We all did. Dante Rossetti appeared each afternoon like clockwork, bringing books and asking how I was settling in. Never pushing, never demanding anything, just checking on me with the same careful attention he had shown that first night when he saw my bruises. We talked about safe things at first. The garden, the weather, the books he brought. But gradually our conversations deepened, moving into territory that felt dangerous and necessary. He asked about my dreams before Marcus Webb. I told him about the college degree I never finished, the photography classes I loved, the way I used to see beauty in everything before I learned to see only threats. He listened with his full attention, gray eyes focused on my face like my words mattered. Like I mattered. When I asked about his family, his childhood, he was more guarded. But over time, pieces emerged. Parents who died when he was young. A business empire inherited along with enemies who would not hesitate to use anyone close to him as leverage. The weight of responsibility that had shaped him into someone who could inspire fear and loyalty in equal measure. The loneliness that came with power that isolated as much as it protected. 3 weeks into my stay, he asked if I would have dinner with him in the main house. Not as a guest or someone under his protection, but as myself. As Isabella Chun. I almost said no. The smart thing would have been to maintain distance, to remember that he was dangerous, that his world was violence, that getting closer meant accepting risks I did not fully understand. But something in his eyes when he asked, a vulnerability that matched my own, made me say yes. The dining room was elegant but not ostentatious, candlelight reflecting off dark wood and crystal. He had cooked, which surprised me. Simple pasta with sauce he made from scratch, salad from the garden, wine that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. We ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, and I found myself relaxing in a way I had forgotten was possible. He told me about his mother, how she had died when he was 11, how he still kept her picture on his desk, how she had taught him that real strength meant protecting people who could not protect themselves. I shared things I had never told anyone. The shame that lived in my chest about staying with Marcus Webb so long, about making excuses and believing promises and returning again and again to someone who hurt me, the crushing weight of feeling stupid and weak and complicit in my own suffering. Dante Rossetti stopped me mid-sentence, his hand covering mine on the table, and said, "Survivors do what they must to survive. There is no shame in that, only strength in the fact that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of sitting across from him and speaking truth." Our conversations deepened with each passing night, moving from facts and history into philosophy and dreams, and I caught him watching me sometimes with heat in his eyes that made my skin flush and my breath catch. An intensity that was different from his usual controlled focus, something raw and hungry that called to an answering need I was only beginning to acknowledge in myself. One night, reaching for my wine glass at the same moment he reached for his, our hands touched, and the contact was electric, a jolt that traveled from my fingertips straight to my core, and neither of us pulled away. Dante Rossetti's thumb stroked along my wrist, gentle and deliberate over the faded bruises that were now yellow and green, healing marks that no longer hurt except in memory. And he asked in a voice rough with restraint if he could touch my face. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and his hand came up to cut my cheek, warm and calloused and impossibly tender, and I leaned into his touch like a plant turning towards sunlight. He murmured that I was beautiful, and the way he said it made me believe him, made me feel beautiful in a way I had not felt in years, maybe ever, because Marcus Webb's compliments had always come with conditions and criticisms attached. But Dante Rossetti's words felt like simple truth offered without expectation of anything in return. The moment shattered like dropped crystal when Dante Rossetti's phone buzzed against the table, harsh and insistent in the soft candle-lit space we had created, and his expression shifted from tender to severe in a heartbeat. The business mask sliding into place with practiced ease as he glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened in a way that told me this was not something he could ignore. He apologized, voice rough with reluctance and what might have been frustration, said he had to handle this immediately. It could not wait, and told me to stay, finish the wine, make myself comfortable in his study if I wanted. He would return as soon as possible. I nodded, tried to hide my disappointment, watched him stride from the room with that focused intensity that transformed him from the man who touched me, like I was precious, into something harder and more dangerous. The duality of him both fascinating and unsettling. I moved to his study because sitting alone in the dining room felt too exposed, too vulnerable, and the study was all dark wood and leather, and the scent of him, books lining the walls, and a massive desk positioned to face the windows overlooking the grounds. I saw the photos on his desk almost immediately, drawn to them like they held answers to questions I had not yet learned to ask. Young Dante Rossetti, maybe 10 or 11. With a beautiful woman who had his eyes in his bone structure, her smile radiant and her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of such casual affection that my heart ached looking at it, knowing what Dante Rossetti had told me about how she died. I heard raised voices outside, sharp and angry, cutting through the quiet night, and I moved to the window instinctively, looking out to see Dante Rossetti in the courtyard with a tall blonde man I had never seen before, their body language aggressive. The stranger gesturing wildly, while Dante Rossetti stood utterly still in that way that meant he was most dangerous. The man pointed toward the guest house, toward where I had been staying, toward me essentially. And even from this distance, I could see the accusation in the gesture, the challenge. Dante Rossetti stepped into the man's space, close enough that it was clearly a threat, his posture radiating violence, held on the thinnest leash, and the blonde man backed down immediately, hands raised in placation or surrender before he turned and walked quickly toward the front gates. Dante Rossetti stood there for a long moment after the man left, head bowed, hands clenched at his sides, before he turned and walked back toward the house with measured steps that spoke of iron control. He found me standing at the window when he entered the study. Must have known I had seen everything, and his expression was unreadable when he asked if I was all right. I asked if I was causing him problems, if my presence here was creating complications he did not need, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear him say it. He said nothing he could not handle, dismissive in a way that did not invite further questions. But I pressed anyway, asked who the man was. Dante Rossetti hesitated, a pause that felt weighted with calculation about what to tell me and what to withhold before he said that was Robert Sterling, his second in command, and he had concerns about outsiders, about security, about variables he could not control. I understood then what I was to Robert Sterling and probably others in Dante Rossetti's organization. A liability, a weakness, a woman who could be used against him by enemies who would not hesitate to hurt innocent people to gain leverage. The thought should have sent me running, should have made me pack my bag and disappear before I caused more problems. But instead it made me angry, not at Dante Rossetti, who had given me safety when I had nowhere else to go, but at the situation, at the fact that my mere existence in his life put him at risk, at the unfairness of a world where seeking protection meant becoming a target. I told him I understood the concerns, understood that my being here complicated things. But I also said that for the first time in years, I felt human again. That whatever danger came with staying was nothing compared to the certainty of what would happen if I went back. Dante Rossetti studied my face for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been decision, or recognition, or the acceptance of a risk he had been calculating since the night he first saw my bruises. He said that his world was dangerous, that people in it lived with constant awareness of threats and consequences, that anyone close to him would need to understand that safety was relative, that protection came with its own costs. But he also said that he had been watching me for weeks, had seen strength in me that I did not seem to recognize in myself, that maybe, if I was willing, we could figure out how to navigate the danger together. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. He laid out the realities of his life with brutal honesty. The enemies who would see me as a target, the need for constant security, the isolation that came with loving someone whose business operated in shadows. He explained about Vincent Torino and the other men who worked for him, how they would become part of my life if I chose to stay, how I would need to learn new ways of being careful, new rules for staying safe. He offered to arrange for me to leave the city entirely, to start fresh somewhere his enemies could not find me. Said he would make sure I had everything I needed to build a new life away from both him and Marcus Webb. But his eyes when he made the offer told a different story, told me that he wanted me to stay, that the careful distance we had been maintaining was as hard for him as it was for me. I thought about my options as he waited for my answer. I could take his offer of a clean escape, disappear into anonymity and safety, build a quiet life somewhere far from mafia politics and violence, and men who saw bruises and wanted to help. Or I could choose the unknown, choose to trust this dangerous man who had already saved me once, choose to build something real despite the risks. The decision should have been difficult. The smart choice was obvious. But sitting there in his study, looking at his mother's picture and the careful way he was trying not to influence my choice, I realized the decision had been made weeks ago. Maybe it had been made that first night when he saw my bruises and offered help. Maybe it had been made in all the dinners and conversations that followed, all the moments when he looked at me like I mattered. I told him I wanted to stay, not just for safety, but for him, for us, for whatever we might build together. The relief that crossed his face was answer enough. He warned me it meant danger, that his enemies would see me as leverage and target, that it meant secrecy, because much of what he did could never be spoken about openly, that it meant moral compromise because his world operated in shades of gray, where right and wrong blurred into expedience and survival. I said I went from one cage with Marcus Webb to another kind of prison in the isolation and fear I had lived with. But this choice felt different because I was choosing it freely, choosing him and the life he offered with full knowledge of what it contained. Something flashed in his eyes, heat and possession and need all tangled together, and he stood abruptly and came around the table to pull me to my feet and then into his arms. Mrs. Hartwell found me humming while making coffee in the guest house kitchen, and she gave me a knowing look, her eyes twinkling with barely suppressed amusement as she said, "I had a certain glow about me this morning," and she was happy to see it. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but could not stop smiling. And she patted my hand in that maternal way she had and said, "Dante Rossetti deserved happiness, and perhaps I did, too." I spent the morning helping Mrs. Hartwell with household tasks, needing purpose and activity to channel the restless energy humming through me. And she talked while we worked, sharing stories about Dante Rossetti, how she had come to work for him 15 years ago when he was just 19 and newly in charge of the family business, how fierce and brilliant and lonely he had been, how she had watched him build an empire but never let anyone truly close. In the afternoon, I was reading in the guest house when a knock at the door made me tense, instinctive weariness flooding through me because Dante Rossetti was gone, and I did not expect anyone. And when I looked through the peephole, I saw Robert Sterling standing on the doorstep, looking polite but serious. I opened the door slowly, keeping it partially closed, and he smiled, but it did not reach his eyes as he asked if he could have a few minutes of my time. He was polite, carefully so, but cold in a way that made clear this was not a social visit. And once inside he got straight to the point, said he needed to understand my intentions with Dante Rossetti. I bristled immediately, said that was between Dante Rossetti and me, none of his concern. But Robert Sterling shook his head and explained that everything involving Dante Rossetti was his concern because his job was keeping Dante Rossetti safe, and I was an unknown variable. He warned me that Dante Rossetti had enemies, serious, dangerous people who would not hesitate to use me to hurt him, that I was a liability whether I intended to be or not, and his eyes were hard when he said I needed to understand what staying meant. I stood firm despite my racing heart, lifted my chin, and said, I never asked for any of this, but I was done running from fear, done making myself small to avoid danger, and if staying with Dante Rossetti meant risk, then that was my choice to make. Robert Sterling studied me for a long moment, reassessing, and something shifted in his expression before he nodded slowly and said, maybe I was stronger than I looked. Maybe I would survive this world after all. He left without another word, but I stood shaking after the door closed, adrenaline flooding through me as I realized I had just been tested and apparently passed. But the encounter left me unsettled and frighteningly aware of how much I still did not understand about the life I was choosing. I told Dante Rossetti about Robert Sterling's visit that night over dinner, my hands wrapped around a wine glass for something to hold. As I recounted the conversation, and I watched Dante Rossetti's expression darken with each detail until fury sparked in his gray eyes, and his jaw tightened with barely contained anger. He said Robert Sterling overstepped, that he had no right to interrogate me or make me feel threatened in what was supposed to be my safe space. And I could see him calculating consequences and responses even as he spoke. I reached across the table and touched his hand, stilling the tension coiled in his fingers, and said that Robert Sterling was protecting him, doing what he thought necessary to keep Dante Rossetti safe. And maybe I needed to understand that kind of loyalty, even if it made me uncomfortable. Dante Rossetti turned his hand over to grip mine, said that was not Robert Sterling's call to make, that I was not a security threat to be assessed and managed, but someone under his protection and increasingly more than that. I said I understood this world had rules I did not know, codes and hierarchies and protocols that everyone else seemed to grasp instinctively. And if I was going to stay, then I needed to learn them, needed to understand how to navigate the structure around him. He warned me it meant danger, that his enemies would see me as leverage and target, that it meant secrecy, because much of what he did could never be spoken about openly, that it meant moral compromise because his world operated in shades of gray, where right and wrong blurred into expedience and survival. I said I went from one cage with Marcus Webb to another kind of prison in the isolation and fear I had lived with. But this choice felt different because I was choosing it freely, choosing him and the life he offered with full knowledge of what it contained. Something flashed in his eyes, heat and possession and need all tangled together. And he stood abruptly and came around the table to pull me to my feet and then into his arms. I will check on you this afternoon, Mrs. Hartwell. I carried the tray inside and ate slowly, tasting food for the first time in what felt like years instead of just consuming fuel to survive. And then I forced myself into the shower, let hot water pound against muscles that ached from tension I could finally release. The mirror showed me damage I had been avoiding. My split lip healing, but still swollen. My cheek bruised, deep purple spreading toward my eye. Finger-shaped marks on both arms in layers of yellow and green and fresh blue, ribs tender when I pressed them, and I stood there cataloging it all like evidence, proof of what I had endured and what I had finally escaped. I dressed in the softest clothes from my duffel bag, leggings, and an oversized sweater that felt like armor against the world. And I explored the guest house properly in daylight, finding a library filled with books that looked read rather than decorative, art on the walls that seemed chosen for beauty rather than investment, comfortable spaces that invited rest. And I felt something in my chest loosen because this was not a showplace. This was a home. Through the window, I saw Dante Rossetti's main house across the lawn, larger and more imposing, and movement caught my eye. Dante Rossetti himself visible through a window. On his phone, pacing with that controlled intensity, I recognized, looking severe and powerful in ways that should have frightened me. And as I watched, he glanced toward the guest house like he knew I was there. And our eyes met across the distance, held for a moment that stretched and pulled tight. He ended his call abruptly, said something I could not hear, and then he was walking across the lawn toward me with purpose in every stride. And my heart started hammering because I did not know what this was, what we were, what happened now. He knocked on the door, and I let him in, and he asked, "How did you sleep?" His gray eyes searching my face, taking in the bruises with an expression that made my breath catch. And I admitted better than I have slept in years, which was true. I had not woken once in terror or frozen in fear, listening for footsteps. I watched him catalog my appearance the way I was cataloging his, the tailored shirt that fit him perfectly, the expensive watch, the controlled power he wore as easily as his clothes. And he asked if I was afraid of him, direct and unflinching. And I considered lying, considered saying no, but I had enough of lies and said yes, but not the way I was afraid of Marcus Webb. And I saw understanding flash in his eyes. Dante Rossetti appreciated my honesty in a way I could see in the slight relaxation of his shoulders, the softening around his eyes, and he moved further into the guest house, keeping a careful distance like he understood I needed space, even as we talked about danger and protection and the reality of what his life actually was. The aftermath settled over us like dust after an explosion. And in the days and weeks that followed Marcus Webb's death and the dismantling of the rival organization that had thought they could use me as leverage against Dante Rossetti, I found myself recovering both physically and emotionally in ways I had not thought possible. Dante Rossetti never left my side during the healing process, canceling meetings and delegating responsibilities so he could be present as I worked through nightmares and sudden panic attacks triggered by unexpected sounds or movements. And his steady presence became my anchor in a way that made me understand the difference between dependence born of fear and partnership built on choice. I came to understand the full scope of his world during those months, the violence and moral complexity that existed beneath the surface of legitimate business operations. And I accepted it with clear eyes because I was not a naive victim anymore, but rather a partner to a dangerous man who had shown me more respect and care than anyone in my previous life ever had. I helped expand the legitimate operations with genuine enthusiasm, applying my business knowledge to real estate acquisitions and security consulting contracts, while understanding that the shadows underneath funded and protected everything we built in the light. Dante Rossetti proposed 3 months after the kidnapping on an ordinary Tuesday evening, as we sat on the terrace, watching the city lights spread below us like scattered diamonds. And the ring he offered was simple and perfect, a single emerald flanked by diamonds that caught the light like captured fire. He asked me to marry him and share his life completely, all of it, the empire and the danger and the future we would build together. And I said yes without hesitation because I had already chosen this path the moment I texted him for help from my locked bedroom. We married quietly with just the inner circle present in the garden behind his house. Mrs. Hartwell crying happy tears as she watched me walk toward Dante Rossetti in a dress of ivory silk that made me feel like someone entirely new. And Robert Sterling stood as best man and toasted to me afterward, admitting in front of everyone that he had been wrong about me, that I belonged here in ways he had not anticipated, and I saw genuine respect in his eyes. On our wedding night, Dante Rossetti held me close in the darkness of our bedroom and told me that I had saved him as much as he had saved me, that I had given him something beyond the empire he had built from blood and necessity, a reason to imagine a future that included more than territory and power. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in integration and adaptation. Dante Rossetti introduced me to the legitimate side of his business empire, the security consulting firm and real estate holdings that operated in full daylight with proper contracts and legal structures. He gave me real work, real responsibilities, and I proved myself capable quickly. My abandoned business degree finally finding purpose as I streamlined operations and identified expansion opportunities. I watched the men who had assessed me with such wariness begin to nod when I spoke in meetings, ask my opinion on deals, treat me as more than just the boss's woman. Vincent Torino became my unofficial bodyguard and surprising friend, his dry humor and protective instincts creating a sense of safety that let me move through the world without constant fear. Mrs. Hartwell continued to mother me in the most wonderful way, sharing stories about Dante Rossetti's childhood, the fierce, brilliant, lonely boy who had inherited an empire and learned to carry its weight alone. The physical relationship between us developed slowly, carefully, with an attention to consent that spoke to Dante Rossetti's understanding of what I had survived. He never assumed, never took, always asked. The first time he kissed me, soft and questioning in the garden after a particularly good day at the office, I felt something inside me heal that I had not even realized was broken. When I was ready, when I told him I was ready, He showed me what it meant to be touched with reverence instead of ownership, what it felt like to give my body freely instead of having it taken, what love could look like when built on respect instead of control. Our first night together was a revelation, gentle and intense, and healing in ways I could not have imagined. He worshipped every inch of me, kissed every faded scar, and made me feel precious in a way that brought tears to my eyes. When I woke in his arms the next morning, sunlight streaming through his bedroom windows, I understood that I had not just escaped my old life. I had found my new one. The challenges came, as he had warned they would. There were threats from rival families who saw me as leverage against him. Security protocols that meant I could not go anywhere alone. The constant awareness that danger lived at the edges of our happiness. But there were also moments of pure joy. Quiet mornings in the garden with Mrs. Hartwell. Business victories that we celebrated together. Dinners where Dante Rossetti would tell me stories about his mother, about the woman who had taught him to see strength in gentleness. Nights when he would hold me close and whisper about futures we might build together. One evening, as we sat on the terrace watching sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, he asked if I regretted choosing his world. If the dangers and complications ever made me wish I had taken his offer to disappear into a quiet life somewhere safe. I thought about the question seriously, because he deserved honest answers. I thought about what my life might have looked like if I had never delivered pizza to the wrong address that night. If I had never met a man with gray eyes who saw my bruises and decided to help. If I had found some other way to escape Marcus Webb and built some other kind of future. I responded that I had found myself in his protection, discovered strength I had not known I possessed, and together we had built something real and lasting from the broken pieces we had both carried. Neither of us was perfect, and our life together would never be simple or safe. But we were perfect together in our imperfection. Two damaged people who had recognized something essential in each other that first night, when a pizza delivery to the wrong address had changed both our lives forever, and the future stretched before us dangerous and uncertain, but utterly ours to claim and defend and shape into whatever we chose to make.